Imagine waking up one morning, looking out your window, and finding that the land your family protected for generations is suddenly covered with brand new houses. Houses you never, ever gave anyone permission to build. Well, that's exactly what happened to Marjorie Whitfield, a 62-year-old retired school administrator in suburban Georgia. An HOA illegally built 96 homes on her land, thinking she was powerless to stop them. They looked at a quiet, older black woman and assumed she wouldn't fight back. Big mistake. They had just walked into a legal trap she'd been setting for years. But this isn't just a story about stolen land. It's a story about what happens when corporate greed and arrogance underestimate the quiet power of preparation. For decades, Marjorie Whitfield didn't just own her property, she guarded it. She built a fortress, not of fences and walls, but of paper. Every tax receipt, every deed, every faded map was a stone in that fortress. The Lakewood Meadows Homeowners Association and their developers thought they'd found a gold mine, nearly 40 acres of seemingly forgotten land, ripe for a luxury subdivision. They saw a blank canvas. What they couldn't see was the invisible, impenetrable legal fortress Marjorie had built around her family's legacy. They were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one making the most noise. It's the one who has been quietly doing their homework for decades. If you believe in justice and love seeing arrogant people get exactly what they deserve, you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on, because you are not going to want to miss a single detail of how this quiet schoolteacher brought an entire HOA to its knees. To really get why the HOA's mistake was so massive, you have to understand what this land meant to Marjorie Whitfield. For her, this wasn't just dirt and grass. It was history, memory, and meaning. We're talking about nearly 40 acres of Georgia soil, handed down from her parents, who had scraped and saved every spare dollar to buy it, paying it off piece by agonizing piece back in the 1950s. She could still hear her father's voice as they walked the property line together when she was just a girl. Land, he'd tell her, his hand on an old fence post, is the one thing they can't make more of. You hold on to it, Marjorie, no matter what. That was a promise she took to heart. That land was a symbol of her parents' hard work and foresight in a world that wasn't always fair to them. It was where her family held reunions, where cousins played hide-and-seek among the Georgia pines, and where the stories of their ancestors were woven into the soil itself. As the years passed, the suburbs of Macon started creeping closer, and developers began circling like hawks. Neighbors sold their land for quick paychecks, but Marjorie held firm. She remembered her father's words. This wasn't just an asset to be sold off. It was a sanctuary. But Marjorie was no sentimentalist. She was a pragmatist, a retired school administrator who knew that, in the real world, good intentions are never enough. She knew that people with money often think they can bend the rules, and she had no intention of letting them. Her vigilance became a quiet, lifelong ritual. It all started with the paperwork. She had a fireproof safe, and inside was a fortress of documents. The original deeds, probate records, and most importantly, the tax receipts. For over 40 years, she paid the property taxes herself, in person, without fail. The clerks at the Bibb County Tax Office knew her by name. One of them even teased her one year. "Mrs. Whitfield, you're one of the few who still comes in person." She'd just smile and reply, "I don't like surprises." This wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. She didn't just pay the taxes. She kept every single receipt, filed in order in a thick binder. She'd already fought off 3 attempts by speculators trying to claim the land was abandoned, each time sending a certified letter with a copy of her latest tax receipt. Undeniable proof of ownership. Twice a year, she would walk the property boundaries, checking the old iron markers her father had driven into the ground. But she knew real security wasn't just in fences. It was in the documents. And then, she made the final, brilliant move. Years before any of this, on the advice of her lawyer and friend Samuel Drayton, she filed a quiet title action. A quiet title action is a legal move that asks a court to officially settle the title to a piece of property, wiping out any potential future claims. It's like building a legal firewall around your land. Her lawyer, Samuel, marveled at her diligence. "Marjorie," he told her, "you've got a fortress here. No one is taking this from you." That one preventative move, something most people would never think to do, was the masterstroke. The court reviewed her mountain of evidence and officially reaffirmed her clear and undisputed title. The trap, though she didn't know it then, was set. All it needed was for someone arrogant enough to walk into it. Let me introduce you to the Lakewood Meadows HOA, a group led by a slick, overly confident president named Clifford Myers. In their eyes, the nearly 40 acres of undeveloped land next to their community wasn't a family's legacy. It was a gold mine. Their fatal mistake was built on pure assumption. They saw land that wasn't being farmed and assumed it was abandoned. They saw an owner who was an older, quiet black woman and assumed she was uninformed and powerless. They never bothered with a deep-dive title search, relying on a quick, suspiciously clean report from a firm that valued speed over accuracy. A junior project manager for their builder, Hanover Construction, actually flagged a problem, pointing to a parcel still marked Whitfield, but Myers just waved it off as a paperwork glitch. His motto? Start fast, fix later. To him, paperwork was just a formality. Who would dare stand up to 96 brand new homes? The bigger community meant higher HOA dues and more power for him. For Marjorie, the discovery was a slow, creeping horror. It started with a rumble. One morning, standing on her back porch, she felt a tremor in the ground and saw a fleet of yellow bulldozers tearing into her fields. Her stomach dropped. She drove over, her heart pounding, and saw a glossy sign, "Coming soon, the estates at Lakewood Meadows." She confronted a project manager, a guy in a hard hat who barely looked up from his clipboard. "This is private property," she said, her voice firm. "This is Whitfield land. What are you doing?" The man smirked. "Not anymore, ma'am. The Lakewood Meadows HOA bought this land. Check the records." But Marjorie knew the records. She had the records. They were in her fireproof safe. Weeks turned into months. Walls went up, then roofs. At HOA board meetings, Clifford Myers gave triumphant updates. 80% sold. We're a regional model, while glasses clinked. The irony was staggering. While they toasted their success, the woman they dismissed was documenting their every move. This is where her quiet preparation turned into a counteroffensive. She wasn't loud. Her cousin even asked why she wasn't raising hell. Marjorie just smiled and said, "They expect noise. Noise fades. Paperwork doesn't." She bought a drone and hired a surveyor to map the encroachment. She set up motion sensor cameras, capturing time-stamped footage of every truck and every worker. Her evidence binder grew fatter by the day, a meticulous diary of the theft. When she was ready, she went to her lawyer. Samuel Drayton drafted a concise, airtight cease and desist letter. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a formal legal warning, grounded in her deeds, tax receipts, and the court-affirmed quiet title. The letter arrived and was met with laughter. Clifford Myers told the board, "She can't touch us." He saw it as a scare tactic from some crank trying to get a payday. They sent back a condescending reply, basically telling her to get lost. They didn't just ignore the warning. They sped up construction. That's when Marjorie looked at Samuel and said the words that would bring everything to a halt. "The gloves are off. File the lawsuit." They had mistaken her reasonableness for weakness. They had no idea who they were messing with. The day the lawsuit was filed in Bibb County Superior Court, Marjorie's quiet storm finally broke. And it wasn't a chaotic tempest. It was a surgical strike. Samuel Drayton didn't just file a complaint. He attached a legal knockout punch, a mountain of evidence that left the HOA's legal team reeling. There were copies of deeds from her parents' original purchase, stacks of tax receipts from over 4 decades, county plat maps, probate filings, and the crown jewel, the certified court order from the quiet title action, where a judge had already declared her the undisputed owner. This wasn't a claim. It was a checkmate on the first move. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the 96 families who had bought into the Lakewood Meadows dream. Suddenly, their homes felt like they were built on quicksand. Legal notices started appearing on their front doors, notifying them that the land they were living on was in dispute. Panic set in. A young couple, the Ramirezes, had just poured their life savings into their first home. "Is this real?" Angela Ramirez asked her husband, her hands shaking. At emergency HOA meetings, Clifford Myers tried to project calm. "Folks, let me put your minds at ease," he'd say. "Yes, there's a woman making claims, but our attorneys assure us it has no merit. You have nothing to worry about." But when a homeowner yelled from the back, "What if she wins?" Clifford's smile faltered.
"She won't," he snapped. Behind the scenes, the HOA's facade was crumbling. Their own lawyers were frantic. Their main argument was that Marjorie had abandoned the land. In court, Samuel Drayton dismantled that claim by simply holding up the binder of 40 years of tax receipts. Abandonment, he argued, requires intent. Does this look like someone who intended to abandon their property? The HOA's entire defense collapsed before the trial even began. Residents started turning on the board. One distraught homeowner, Angela Ramirez, found Marjorie's number and called her, her voice cracking. "Are we going to lose our home?" Marjorie's response showed her true character. Her fight was never with the families. "You should never have been put in this position," she told her calmly. "I don't want to hurt innocent families, but I cannot let the HOA steal my family's legacy. This fight isn't with you, it's with them." On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom was packed. On one side sat Clifford Myers, pale and sweating. On the other sat Marjorie Whitfield, calm and resolute. When Marjorie took the stand, the room fell silent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. "My parents worked themselves to the bone to buy that land," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They told me to protect it, and I have. I didn't build those houses. I didn't invite those families there. The HOA made that choice." You could feel the sentiment in the room shift as homeowners redirected their anger toward the men in expensive suits who had sold them a lie. Barrett, when Judge Patricia Long was ready to deliver her verdict, you could have heard a pin drop. Clifford Myers stared blankly ahead, a man who already knew his fate. The judge adjusted her glasses. "After reviewing the overwhelming evidence presented," she began, "this court finds that the plaintiff, Mrs. Marjorie Whitfield, has maintained uninterrupted, documented, and continuous ownership of the disputed property." A collective gasp swept the room. "Taxes have been paid. Deeds were properly recorded. A prior court has already reaffirmed her title," the judge continued. "The construction of the Lakewood Meadows subdivision on her land was conducted without her consent or legal authority." A young, pregnant woman in the front row buried her face in her husband's shoulder and sobbed. Then came the final blow. "Therefore," the judge declared, "the court recognizes Mrs. Marjorie Whitfield as the rightful, legal owner of the property on which the Lakewood Meadows subdivision was built." The world collapsed for the 96 families. For Marjorie, it was quiet vindication. She closed her eyes and whispered, so softly only Samuel could hear, "Mama, Daddy, we did it." The verdict was a legal earthquake. Property values in Lakewood Meadows plummeted to zero. Banks froze mortgages. Realtors yanked every listing. Hanover Construction, the builder, declared bankruptcy within weeks. And the HOA? It just disintegrated. Clifford Myers resigned in disgrace, last seen snapping, "This isn't over," at reporters before disappearing. The most dramatic fallout was the human cost. 96 families were now, legally, squatters on land that belonged to Marjorie Whitfield. They couldn't sell their homes. Their titles were worthless. They faced the terrifying prospect of eviction. In the midst of the chaos, Marjorie once again showed her true character. She attended a tense community meeting, not to gloat, but to talk to the families. "I do not hate you," she said, her voice full of empathy. "You are also victims of false promises. This land was stolen from me, and I had to fight. The people you should be angry with are the ones who sold you a dream built on a foundation of lies." With the court's judgment behind her, Marjorie held all the cards.
But she wasn't interested in revenge, just justice.
Hashtag meta sex 0.05.
She and her lawyer began the complicated process of negotiating a solution. She offered the homeowners two choices. They could buy the lot their house sat on from her at its fair market value, or they could pay her ground rent. She wasn't going to evict 96 families. She was simply asserting her rights as the owner of the ground beneath their feet. So in the end, Marjorie Whitfield's story became a powerful parable about justice, legacy, and the underestimated power of quiet preparation. She won because for 40 years, she did the unglamorous, diligent work of protecting what was hers. She paid her taxes. She kept her records. She knew her rights. Her victory was a testament to the idea that a fortress of paperwork, built with patience and precision, can be more powerful than any bulldozer. The Lakewood Meadows HOA gambled that a quiet, retired black woman wouldn't have the will to fight back. They couldn't have been more wrong. They walked right into a trap that wasn't laid with malice, but with a lifetime of loyalty to a family's legacy. Those 96 houses still stand, a monument to colossal arrogance. But the land they sit on is, and always was, Whitfield land. Marjorie's fight proved that real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a fireproof safe, just waiting for its moment. It's a reminder that what is rightfully yours is worth defending, patiently, meticulously, and without blinking. What do you think about Marjorie's incredible strategy? Have you ever had your own nightmare experience with an HOA? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you found this story as inspiring as I did, make sure to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the little guy can and does win. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.